the stuff we turned up, the smoking guns that we found that proved them to be liars. In fact, a couple of them perjured themselves to the judge in writing. And so it came down to the judge ruling on a motion that they made before the judge. Judge, just throw this case out. They have no proof of this, no proof of that. And I'll discuss that a little more in detail later. But the judge ruled and said, nope, you're wrong. They produced the facts. And so these are facts. And if you go to trial, and I'm about to force you to go to trial, and not a judge trial, a jury trial. We demanded a jury trial. If you go to trial, the beginning of the trial will be, ladies and gentlemen, here are the undisputable facts in this case. Bing, 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 all against the university. So they knew they couldn't win. And so they came to the mediation table in court. We spent a whole day in the courtroom. And they fought us and fought us and fought us and fought us. We made a demand. They would not meet the demand. And at the end of the day, they were shouting at us across the courtroom with the judge right there. I was mystified. And so we left with no agreement. And we told them, look, we're going to trial, and we're going to bring in this other law firm that already beat you once, high-powered law firm, and our demand is off the table, and sky high is the number. So finally, after a couple of weeks, they caved in and they met our demand. The reasons they gave me for termination were laughable. Mostly because my lab was a booming lab, and all of the emails that were flying back and forth in the department were, Mark's lab is booming, we have to do something, okay, we did the videos, that's not really helping, so what can we do? And that was the way my lab was running, and I would stay later. I would come in at 6 o'clock in the morning and leave at 5 o'clock at night some days. I would shift my days to accommodate other professors. And remember, I was training undergraduates, graduates, and professors. And I had people all lined up. And so when I finally asked, what is the reason for my termination? And you have to understand, I sent that email to as many people in the department as I could think of. What was the reason for my termination? And that was the subject line. And we presented all these at trial. Most of the professors said, I don't have a clue. I have no idea why you're being terminated. But they didn't want to be involved. You know, it's kind of like people see something bad going down and they walk the other way because they don't want to be a part of it. And so nobody had a reason. And then the chair of the department, new chair of the department, came into my lab and said, well, we don't have the resources to continue running this laboratory, and there's no demand for the electron microscopes, which was true. But my lab was also stock full of fluorescent microscopes, which is where I was spending 100% of my time training. So we have to close down this laboratory because the electron microscopes have fallen out of use, and that's what you were hired to do. Excuse me, you sent me to the factory for training on this confocal microscope. I did 12 hours of video on the confocal microscope. I'm training everybody under the sun on the confocal microscope, and you're going to shut down my lab? Yes, it's resources. We don't have the resources, and we're going to change this into a DNA lab. This whole thing is going to be full of DNA sequencers. So it didn't wash. And then when we got to court, they said, well, the chair said, well, I met with the administrator of the department, and she said, we'll save $100,000 a year by terminating Mark's position. And we uncovered all the documents that showed that that was a lie. And then we got him to admit under oath that that was a lie. I think it's important to look at the judge's ruling because the opposition demanded via a motion for adjudication that the judge actually specifically look at the facts. The judge is called a trier of fact. Believe me, you learn a whole jargon when you get into a legal battle. But the judge, as a trier of fact, once presented with a motion for adjudication, means you're a judge, do your judgely thing. And so the judge had to, via a strict series of rules, evaluate all the evidence and rule on it. The university claimed that I was temporary and that no one replaced me in my job. Well, when I interviewed, they said, you are permanent part-time. They said it's an odd phrase, but it works for what we want to do. I was never told that I was temporary. If I was temporary, according to the union contract, and I was a union member, according to the union contract, after 2 years of service, I would have been automatically permanent. They never made me permanent, so they violated the union contract by claiming that I was temporary. I was there 38 months, so I should have been automatically made permanent. They also produced a whole bunch of documentation after I was terminated and realized I went straight to HR, I went straight to Human Relations and asked for a copy of my employment file. And they couldn't give it to me. They said, come back tomorrow. It took them a week to finally deliver my personnel file. And in it were all these documents substantiating that I was temporary. And it was really funny because when we went to the court, we produced documentation, they produced documentation. They produced a sheet of paper that was a printout of the website. And I think it was dated October 8th, 1999. And it listed the job description for my job that I was applying for. And in the regular/temporary line, it said temporary. Now, I had gone online to print off the same exact sheet. However, I did it 1 day earlier, and down at the bottom it said October 7th, 1999. And in the little line that says regular temporary, it said regular. So I had an earlier version of the sheet off the website, and I began to wonder, well, since they know I'm a Christian and a creationist, did they go and change this in the middle of the interviews? And that was actually after my interview. So I'm wondering if HR went and changed that. I had the earlier one, and the earlier one trumps, and so we beat them on that one. So we proved that I was not a temporary. They were also claiming that no one replaced me. Well, we proved that Dr. Kwok replaced me, and he was doing all the training in the laboratory. To his detriment, actually. We'll talk about that later. They also claimed that the only reason for me being there was the electron microscopes. And of course, I've discussed previously that I was doing training on all the other fluorescent microscopes. My lab was booming. It was full of students. We couldn't get enough in there. And so clearly, my reason for being there was not just to use the EM scopes. Now, bear in mind, I'm quoting the judge here on each of these points. The judge said the department claimed that they were facing budget cuts. Well, we demanded all the financial information, and we went through them in the depositions. And they had to admit, after every single financial document, there were no cuts. In fact, money to the department was increasing. Students to the department was increasing. Faculty to the department was increasing. So we destroyed that one. According to the judge, the department claimed that they would save $100,000 a year by ending my position. We proved the opposite. In fact, we got the chair of the department to admit that he was wrong, that he inflated those numbers. So we destroyed that one. The judge said that the department claimed that they did not know about my creation science. And we got them to admit that they knew that I gave full disclosure in my interview, and that faculty were talking about my creationism just months before my termination took place. In fact, when the paper was in press and finally published, all that time they agreed that they knew I had stuff online talking about creationism. So we got them to admit that, so we destroyed that one. They claimed that they did not know about my research. According to the judge, the department claimed they did not know about my research. Well, we proved through documentation that they knew that I went to the dig, that I found the horn, that I found the soft tissue, that I got the journal cover, and that I was writing a paper. So we destroyed that one. They claimed, according to the judge, that my lab was closed. And so Mark Armitage was no longer needed because the lab actually closed. We proved through documentation and their own admission, many of them admitted, oh yeah, the lab is in full swing. Dr. Kwok is doing all the training, a ton of students, ton of microscopes. Yeah, so we destroyed that one. The point is that the judge did her job in a motion for adjudication by looking at each one of the facts that the university claimed as fact and by systematically destroying them with the evidence that we produced from depositions and from disclosure. So this is a clear vindication. I'm a microscopist. I've been one for many, many years. I've worked for all the big microscopy companies. I've done research and published extensively in microscopy. I served as president of the Southern California Society for Microscopy for several years, and I'm still on the board. I serve as treasurer now. I think I've been on the board for 18 years. And so in my duties as a microscopist, I would call on the local universities, and California State University Northridge, or CSUN, was one of them. And when I went in one day, they said, you know, we have an open position for a microscopist. Do you know electron microscopy? Well, of course I do. I did electron microscopy in my master's thesis, which was in parasitology, and I had to use electron microscopes to look at the parasites. So I have a lot of experience in all forms of microscopy. And they said, great, why don't you apply? So I applied to California State University Northridge Biology Department for the position, and I was interviewed. They called me in for an interview, and they said, bring examples of your publications, which I did. And I interviewed, and I thought, you know, I'm probably not going to get this job anyway, so I'm just going to give full, total disclosure here. And so I told them I'm a Christian. I'm a published creationist. I have publication in creationist journals, not just in secular journals. And in fact, there's a critique of some of my work on the CSUN website. Well, we don't care about that. We care about your expertise in microscopy. And I got my master's degree at the Institute for Creation Research when it was down in San Diego before they closed it down and moved to Dallas. And like I say, I did my master's work in parasitology. And it's really interesting because during the lawsuit, in one of the depositions where we questioned people under oath, my supervisor was asked, well, what struck you most about Mark's resume and his experience? And they said, his master's degree. And I was at the Institute for Creation Research, clearly a creationist organization. So I thought that was really funny. But anyway, I got the job. And I started January of 2010. And my job was to move all the electron microscopes that the biology department had in different places and other microscopes into the brand new, I think, $50 million Chaparral Hall. And it was the top floor laboratory with about 7, it was a suite of laboratories. So there was a big door on the front with a key code. You had to know the key code to get in, and very few of us knew the key code. So I had to move everything up there, get it installed, get it running. I had to comply with all the local and campus requirements for electricity, for magnetism, for water, for X-ray production. I had to build a dark room. And so I got everything running. That was the first part of my job. Second part of my job was to start training people on all this equipment. In the meantime, as I was installing it, the university was receiving grants from the Keck Foundation and from the National Institutes of Health to purchase a brand new $350,000 plus, because we added more equipment to it, confocal microscope, which is different from electron microscopes. It's a fluorescent microscope, but very sophisticated. You can look at living tissue in real time. You look at proteins actually moving in real time with this really cool microscope. And so I was sent to Pennsylvania for a week-long training for course number 1. They wanted to send me back for course number 2. So I became a guru, the expert, on all these microscopes in the laboratory. Now, in the summer of 2012, I went on a dinosaur dig. And we found the Triceratops horn. I brought it back to the lab, and I examined it. By the way, I have my own electron microscope lab, which is actually better than the CSUN lab was. So I pretty much used my own microscopes to do the work. And I got a journal cover published, a picture on the journal. And everybody knew it in the department. They lauded me. Attaboy, Mark, good job. Doing a great job. You're teaching everybody, doing a great job. In fact, they kept saying, your lab is booming, and this is a problem because we have so many people that need to be trained, and it's booming, and you're only here 2 days a week, and we need you all week long. Would you please consider coming for a week, every week? We want you full time, basically, is what they were saying. And I couldn't. I had other obligations that I had to meet. But my lab was bottlenecked. We couldn't get enough people in there. So everybody started complaining. We can't get into Mark's lab. We need to get into Mark's lab. We need the training. So I suggested to the university that we make a series of training videos. And so they sat me down, much like we are here, only I was in front of the microscope. And I did 12 hours of training, which is on their website to this day. They're still using it to train students, even though I was thrown out. So, getting to the lawsuit. Everybody knew about my work. One student in particular was really excited about my work. And he was in my lab. We had finished training. He was asking me all these questions. Show me the cells. I want to see the cells. Where did they come from? What bone? Where did you find it? What does this mean? And I said, well, I don't think they're old. I think they have to be young. I mean, look at the cells. And so he was all excited. So he put all his books in his book bag and said, I got to go, and he took off. 15 minutes later, his supervisor, Professor Ernie Kwok, came to the outside of my lab because he didn't have the key. He couldn't get in. And he was banging on the outside door. So I thought, there's a fire in the building or something. I went to open the door. He brushes in past me. And he turns around and he goes, we're not going to tolerate your religion in this department. We're not going to tolerate your little creationist projects either, or your religion. This is a science department. We do science here. Well, I kept my cool. And I looked at him and I said, Ernie, what is unscientific about soft tissue and dinosaur bone? In other words, what's religious about that? And he didn't have an answer. But he kept going on, this is a science department. And I said, well, I think you just violated my civil rights. I think you just discriminated against my religion and my free speech. And he was taken aback by that. And he said, well, we should have this conversation in front of your supervisor. And I said, yeah, great, let's do. And he stormed out. Well, I emailed my supervisor immediately and told him what happened. And not long after that, my supervisor came in. He put his arm around me. He said, Mark, you're doing a great job. Don't stop doing what you're doing. You're doing your job. You're doing it well. And frankly, Mark, I don't care if you're a druid, because I don't really care about your religion, because you're doing your job. I thought, well, okay. don't worry about this. This will blow over. This is nothing. Okay, fine. But I had already put it in writing, a complaint in writing to him. The chair of the department came up and put his arm around me and said, Mark, this is nothing. Let it blow over. Nothing's going to happen. Now, unbeknownst to me, there were emails flying back and forth between these people saying, I think I just violated the law, and I think I just got the department in trouble, and I think I just got myself in trouble, and I'm freaked out because Mark was talking about his civil rights and his freedoms and how I violated those, and I hope this doesn't come back to hurt the department, and other emails that we found out later. So I let it go, and I continued to do my job. However, I did one thing which in retrospect I think was pretty smart. I asked for letters of recommendation from the chair and others in the department. I got fabulous letters of recommendation. In fact, the chair, Dr. Cohen, who had been in the department 20, 30 years, said, Mark is the best staff member in the history of the department. I felt really good about that. Why? Because I was trying to do my job, do it well, own my craft, teach as well as I could. And I'll tell you, we had some students. I had one student who took my training and then went to Caltech to collaborate with the laboratory there. She was offered a job on the spot. Back to the lawsuit. Time went by. And as I mentioned, I landed a journal cover with a picture of the dinosaur tissue that showed that it was cut with a knife and not sawed down. And so that told everybody immediately, this is soft tissue. How can you cut this tissue with a knife and get beautiful cells like this if they're not soft? And so everybody knew about the work. Then in about September, October, Dr. Oppenheimer, who is an editor on a journal called Acta Histochemica, a journal that's been around for 60 years or longer, very well-respected journal. He kept sending me papers from PhDs saying, would you review this? Would you review and edit this? And would you look at their pictures? And they were all microscopy papers. And I said, sure. And so I did that for him. Great job, Mark, great job. And then finally he said, what have you got? Have you got a paper that you'd like to submit? Yes, I do. So I wrote up a paper on the soft dinosaur tissues that we found. And bear in mind, this is the significant part of my work. All of the other workers who went out to look for soft tissues looked for long bones, femurs. Why? Because they're massive and they're highly encapsulated. What does that mean? They're like big concrete tombs, uncracked, unbroken. And any soft tissue would be found deep inside where they're highly protected from the environment and from microbes and bacteria and insects and from degradation. What we found was a Triceratops horn that was ripped away from the skull. It actually even had a piece of the skull attached to it. And then it was buried large and up. So the point was pointing down. And so it was pointing up. It was about 2 feet from the surface in Montana. So bacteria, microbes, insects, rodents, plant roots, fungal bodies. This thing was packed with everything. In fact, when we first took it out of the ground, we wrap it in burlap and make a cast like you put on your arm. We cast it, then you roll it over. When we rolled it over, it just fractured into a bunch of different pieces, and I thought, we're not going to find anything here. Why? Because I'd been reading the papers in the literature, and it was saying long bones, long bones, long bones. That's the key. We never found a long bone. We found the horn. What I found in that horn, besides the DNA of 30 organisms, we did a DNA analysis and found the DNA of 30 organisms living in that environment. I found stretchy, fibrillar tissue. Now, most people don't understand what that is. When bones make bone, they lay down a carpet of collagen. Collagen is kind of a connective tissue. And they lay down, these are the cells. The cells lay down a carpet of collagen, and then they go lay themselves down on the collagen, and then they cement themselves in with bone. And that's how bone is made. And so I found bone that had yet not been hardened with bone mineral. It was in the process. And they were large sheets. And this is unheard of to find something like this. And they were loaded with these cells, these osteocytes that I told you about. And so the work is significant. And so Dr. Oppenheimer asked for a paper. I submitted the paper in late December. In fact, people said, Christmas is here. Don't do it now. No, I'm going to do it now. So I did. It was accepted within 30 days. Now that's unheard of. There were not even hardly any revisions that they requested. So I made the revisions, and by January 30th, the paper was accepted for publication, and it was published on February the 12th, either 12th or the 13th. I'm missing that date right now. But it was published online. 2 weeks after my paper was published, I was terminated. Now, in that 2 weeks, some very interesting things happened. My boss, my supervisor, came into my lab, my former supervisor actually, because Dr. Kwok had become my supervisor. My former supervisor came in and he said, "There's a witch hunt going on after you right now. What have you done?" And I said, "Well, I can't think of anything other than the paper. The paper was published online. It was about to come out in the print journal, and I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong." And I said, "Bill, I think it's the paper." Okay, I got to figure this out. So he left, comes back again. "Would you please resign?" Why would I resign, Bill? I love my job. I'm having the time of my life. I'm making a good income for the 2 days I'm here. You guys are paying me a lot of money to be here 2 days a week. Plus I get the CalPERS full boat, retirement package and all the benefits. I was part-time, but I was not temporary. And we discussed that in my interview. I was not temporary. They told me, "You are permanent part-time." And so, why am I going to give all this up, Bill? And then he comes back in and he goes, I don't think I can save you. I see what's going on in this department, and you're going to be history. And so I left for that week. He came back the next week, and Bill came in and he said, "You need to organize the lab, and I need lists of what still needs to be done, what students you have, what projects they're doing." And these are master's students who were doing their master's theses. And when they shut down my lab, they threw away all the work that some of these master's students had done. That's callous. So I prepared all these lists, and he said, "You're going to receive your termination letter tomorrow." And sure enough, my termination letter came, and 2 weeks later, I was gone. And so I thought and prayed. I thought, "Lord, should I fight this?" Because they clearly discriminated against me. Ernie Kwok clearly discriminated against me. In the 6 months after he came into my lab, he became my supervisor. And he would call me into meetings and berate me and push me around and tell me, "You answer to me, you answer to me." So I thought, well, what's the Christian thing to do? And then I thought, you know what? There's a lot of people out there who are beaten down in their jobs. They're beaten down by evolution. They're beaten down by the discrimination against their religion. And I need to stand up for those people if it's God's will. And so from beginning to end, it's always been about the Lord. It's about encouraging others. It's been about standing up for His word. And so I found some attorneys, and I started working with them, and they quit. In fact, Jay Sekulow turned this lawsuit down, and many others did. So I found a group of attorneys and worked with them for a while, and they quit. And I found another group of attorneys and worked with them for a while, and they quit. I went through 7 attorneys before, almost 3 years later, 2.5 years, I finally found Church State Counsel, which was willing to work this case. And we only had about 6 months, 5 months to pull this off. So we moved heaven and earth to do this lawsuit. But it was discouraging. And I kept praying, Lord, your will be done. Your will be done. This is about you. This case has never been about Mark Armitage. In fact, this case has never been about dinosaurs. That's just the vehicle that we're riding in to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. If dinosaurs have soft tissue in them, and everywhere we look there's soft tissue, then something is wrong with the belief system that says the world is billions of years old, God doesn't exist, His word is meaningless, Jesus is not coming back. How many people are beaten down by this message every day? And so that's the importance of this case. It's to magnify God's word, to show God's word is true. You can believe it. You can trust it. You can put your trust in the book of Genesis and in the book of Acts and in all the letters from Paul that tell us that Jesus is real. All those red letters in the gospel, you can trust those because those come from the Creator of the universe who died for me, and He left His fingerprint on the earth. And so it's about the gospel. This whole thing has been a God thing from beginning to end. Remember, it's not about Mark, it's not about dinosaurs, it's about God, His word, His character.